We're speaking to Brien Foerster today, and if you're not familiar with his work, he has been trekking the world and looking and reporting on not only evidence of advanced technology in Peru, where he's located, but also in Egypt, Mexico, all over the place. And he's done an excellent job in 20 plus books that he's written over the years on that topic. But fascinated in Brian's work with what I would call a lost civilizations. These are Homo sapiens sapien branches or genesis or genus of groups of people that have come and gone, and we don't know how old they are. And the great thing about Brian's work is that he has actually taken a good stab at this and documented not only the Paracas people, who are very strange anatomically based in Peru, but also groups in Europe and in Mexico, and has been documenting this work for a number of years. So we're going to talk about that today. The reason I'm bringing this up is that we have great evidence for advanced technology, advanced science, perhaps advanced physics, but who is behind this? And again, another question that Brien brings up is, are these pre-Diluvian? Are these people that are so old we don't know about them because they were destroyed in the great cataclysm that people like Graham Hancock and others describe? So, Brien, welcome to Earth Ancients. Great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Cliff.
Talk a little bit about your work. You have been, Jesus, a couple of decades worth of research in working with the dynastic Egyptian area. You've been doing tours in Egypt and in Peru. And you write in your bio that you initially got interested in this on a trip to, I guess, Cusco, and these huge cyclopic megalithic walls. And that was kind of like a starting point. Talk a little bit about your interest.
Well, yeah, actually, the first day that I was in Cusco, where I lived actually for 5 years, I noticed that I hired a local guide and he showed me around and we looked at simple stone structures and then these megalithic structures. And I said, who did all of that? And he said, the Inca did all of it. And I said, that's impossible. The megalithic work, you can't fit a human hair in the joints. You're talking huge stones in terms of construction, different styles. So that really piqued my interest. And then I looked up in the standard academic papers about it, and all of the academics and archaeologists insist that the megalithic work was also done by the Inca. And it's like, they had copper chisels. It's ridiculous. So my attention just became more and more drawn to Peru. And eventually, about 15 years ago, I moved there in order to pursue this, fascinating subject.
Interesting. Now, you took it one step beyond just looking at the evidence of what looks like advanced science technology. You began studying the actual people. And when did you come across the skeletal remains of the Paracas people? Because this is really what your concentration has been, and we're going to focus a little bit on that.
Yeah, that was about, I would guess, 13 or so years ago. I walked into a little museum in the little town of Paracas and saw these enormous elongated skulls and became great friends with the director of the museum. And, the cranial volume in some cases is 30% larger than a Homo sapiens sapiens. So I thought, obviously something very strange is going on here. And through the years, I've been able to document hundreds of these skulls. I've been able to see a few mummies as well, including unborn babies at 8 months old in utero that had elongated heads. And, it is a fascinating subject that few people have pursued as heavily as I have.
Yeah. You have documented and written a number of books and papers and had YouTube channel videos on it. Why isn't this subject more of interest to scientists, universities? Because if this is a branch of human that we're not familiar with, we should be all over this.
I know it's actually being blocked by academics. We did some initial DNA testing of, I think, 23 elongated skulls, and the results did not satisfy the archaeologist we were working with. He said, "You must have contaminated every sample," because he expected Andean DNA in the matriarch or the in the female DNA that we were analyzing, and it turned out not to be. Like in 21 cases, it was more akin to elongated skulls found in Eurasia, especially around the Black Sea. So immediately he said, "Well, you must have contaminated the DNA, and you're not allowed to do any more testing."
That's weird.
It is.
What did you find in the DNA? Did you find that there were branches from, I mean, because this is obviously in Peru, which is in South America. Did you find that there were links to other parts of the world? Was it a breakdown of known DNA and then some really unusual DNA? What did you find in your testing?
Well, the only other really big elongated skulls that I've been able to find existed around the Black Sea and Caspian Sea area about at the same time as the Paracas. And so the DNA that we got from the Paracas female DNA matched exactly the haplogroups that we find in and around the Black Sea and Caspian Sea area. So there must be a connection. Again, only two samples showed Andean Indian DNA,
And
where
the rest of it was European,
Eurasian.
Eurasian.
Yeah.
Fascinating. It's funny because about, I want to say 10 years ago, I ran across a article written by a pathologist who had studied a cranium from Paracas, and he came to the same conclusion without really cutting the head up. He believed that this sample of this individual was had a brain capacity of between 15 and 30% greater than our own.
Mhm.
And he was curious as to where they came from. But I'd like you to describe a little bit the anatomical differences between Homo sapiens sapien craniums and what makes the Paracas cranium so unusual.
Well, one of the main ones is the lack of the sagittal suture, which is the suture that goes from the front of your forehead down all the way to the back of your head. It's completely missing in the oldest examples,
Hmm.
which no doctor so far has been able to satisfactorily explain. Also, the eye sockets are larger than normal by about 30%. The jaw is much more robust than a standard Homo sapiens sapiens. And the foramen magnum, which is where your spinal column enters the bottom of your skull, is a full 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch back from where it should be.
So were these a large people, a small people? When you observe a number of their remains, what is the average height of these people?
Between 5'9" and 6 feet.
Oh, so they're not small at all. They're actually, yeah, they're actually tall. What would
Yeah.
you say? It's funny because when I read your work, I'm always interested in where are their cities? Where are their ruins? We don't really show major Paracas ruins, or are there ruins?
Yeah, there are 3 or 4 locations in the Paracas area that have not been well excavated, but the evidence suggests that they lived underground.
Oh, Jesus, really?
Yeah, that they literally built their houses underground, with a latch door of some kind on top or a flap to open up in order to go out and come back in.
Hmm.
So, yeah, the main habitation, which from a distance you could still see the outline of the city, population was probably about 1,000 people, but they're all underground dwellings.
Does it feel to you that they may have migrated from somewhere else
I
to,
think they migrated from the Black Sea, Caspian Sea area.
so they were maybe what? They decided to do some exploration and that's how they migrated, or did they migrate because they were kicked out of the Caspian area?
I think they were probably chased out.
Yeah. It's funny because you also work with Maria Wheatley. We had Maria on the program, and she wrote a book about Stonehenge and some of the skeletal remains that she found there. And those are smaller people with elongated heads, but they were actually killed by the locals. So is it the belief that you have possibly that these long heads were treated as pariah?
I think so. I think it's a standard, story through history on every continent of an invading force coming in and forcing out the indigenous population rather than mixing in with them and absorbing them. So I honestly think that's what happened. There was a migration that happened probably around 1000 BC.
Okay, so it's old, but not seriously old. In your book on catastrophic events, do you think that these longheads are part of an earlier civilization that was worldwide?
Well, we honestly don't know. As far as we can tell, the elongated headed people go back to about 1000 BC, but farther back than that, we honestly don't know because there's been very little carbon-14 testing of the skulls.
What's your gut feeling on that? Why would they not be interested in these wonderful skeletal remains that are so unusual?
I think they don't want the paradigm shifted. I mean, the evidence is mounting, some of the work having been done by me, but I think it's like the same thing with the megalithic structures. Egyptologists and other academics simply will not entertain the idea that there was advanced technology before the time of the Pharaoh or the Inca, etc. But luckily, that's starting to crumble now. The younger academics are much more open-minded, probably because of the existence of YouTube.
That's funny. What do we know? What do we suspect is their cultural development? Are they, would you say, scientifically advanced? You have books and papers on stone cutting, tubular drills, and advanced stone masonry techniques. Do you think that the Paracas and perhaps these other longheads were from or are the descendants from a very advanced culture?
I don't think so. The Paracas seem to have been more than anything a Stone Age culture because the artifacts that we find, you find the odd gold and silver artifact, but it seems that stone tools were mainly what they utilized. So they were definitely not responsible for any of the megalithic construction, as far as I can tell. They were great at agriculture and fishing and seafaring and things like that.
Okay. In the book that you wrote with David Hatcher Childress, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation, you believe that and actually show that these longheads are found in Egypt, South America, Mexico, Malta, and in China. Now, are they all as long as the Paracas people, or they just have longer heads than we currently have?
Well, almost all of those examples are the result of cranial deformation or head binding. The Paracas are the only ones, and the ones in Eurasia are the evidence that they were born naturally with elongated heads. So, as we discussed, larger cranial volume than normal, which you can't do with deformation. You can't change the volume of a skull. So that's genetics.
So, if we have these elongated heads, why were people binding their heads following perhaps that phase in human history? Was it because they wanted to replicate those craniums, or was it something else?
I think it was to try to replicate or copy living beings that existed in their ancestry. So that's the case that we find with the Paracas. As the Paracas began to mix in with the later Nazca culture, because the Nazca people look normal. So over the generations, the skulls began to shrink in size. And so I think that's why they decided to start binding the skulls in order to replicate the look of what the ancestors looked like.
I've had a couple of people on the program who believe that the skull deformation was done so the pituitary, not the pituitary, the pineal gland could be enhanced in some way. And the belief is that these elongated people who had natural skulls that size had more of a psychic awareness or enhanced perception, cognitive perception because of their brains. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I agree with that because we see a lot of examples of trepanation amongst the Paracas people, and quite often it appears to be in the front or the back of the skull. If it was the result of warfare, you'd have a tendency for the trepanation or brain surgery to happen on the side of the skull because you're naturally try to whack someone on the side of their head rather than in the front of the back. So I think there is evidence that ancient surgery was being performed by the Paracas people in order to trigger the pineal gland to release ancient ancestral powers that were probably lost over the course of centuries.
And that brings me to another subject, Brian. Is it are we not looking close enough at the brains of these guys, these Paracas people and these other cultures that had long heads? Perhaps they were working on a different level than we are currently. We're all consumed about making a buck and, living a lifestyle. Perhaps they were more spiritual in nature. Maybe they were working with earth energies, telluric fields, and things like that that we don't understand.
Yeah, I think so. Also, there's no evidence of weaponry amongst the Paracas that I've been able to find. So they seem to have been a very peaceful, highly intellectual, highly spiritual people who, again, when the invasion of the Nazca people appeared around 100 BC to 100 AD, they were slaughtered wholesale.
Really? Wow. Do
Yeah,
we have any? Go ahead.
we we found a mass grave that dates from about 100 AD. Excuse me, where about 50 individuals were literally dumped in a pit and rapidly buried, not in a graceful or respectful manner. So
Hmm.
bones lying over to the left, to the right. Almost all of the skulls showed major trauma to the head.
Has anyone been able to get a complete Paracas brain to study?
No, no. The brains tended to be removed before burial.
Wow, really? That's fascinating. What do we have in the form of literature or writing? Is there a language or a alphabet or something written from the Paracas people?
No, nothing at all.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Nothing at
Hmm.
all. Is it because you think it's been buried or tossed aside, or the remaining people are were kind of regressed from the originals?
I think it was a regression. I don't think they developed like a hieroglyphic or glyph system. It was all likely oral tradition being passed down.
Interesting. You've been on Ancient Aliens a number of times. Do you have any feeling that these are off-world hybrids of some kind?
I entertain the idea because again, they suddenly appear around 1000 BC and disappear around 100 AD. That's much too short a time for evolution. So it's believed, or I'm open to the possibility that they actually did come from somewhere else off planet, arrived, and then bred with local hominids.
So they came to Europe and then migrated to Paracas. This is where you're finding them. Is that what your suggestion is?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. How do the Paracas people compare to the longheads that Maria Wheatley discovered in the Stonehenge area?
Well, as far as I can tell, what Maria found, again, were examples of head binding or cranial deformation. So not overly large skulls in proportion to the body. So that's what makes the Paracas quite unique as far as I can tell.
I thought that the queen that she found in that one long barrow was a natural cranium. So you're saying that it was head bound.
Well, actually, that I don't know. I haven't been able to get a copy of her book yet. So whatever Maria says, I believe, because she is a very good researcher and scholar. So if that's what she says, but I'm still waiting to get a copy of the book to be able to actually look at the diagrams of the skulls that have been found.
You're the first researcher, Brian, that has somewhat speculated that there could be off-world genetics involved with these Paracas people because they're so unusual looking. Where else in the world do we have examples of heads that are as big as the Paracas people? I mean I haven't seen them, but maybe you can reference a few other locations.
Again, only around the Black Sea and Caspian Sea area, also in Crimea. So if you look up, you can look on a engine Russian elongated skulls or Crimean elongated skulls, and you'll find some very good recent examples in the last 5 years that have been found, especially in Crimea for some reason.
And are their burials unusual or are they just like anybody else locally? Is there anything unique about these long heads in Crimea and Eastern Europe?
Well, they seem to be people of royal lineage, and the same thing with the Paracas. I know they recently found the burial of a young child about 2 years old, and the head is enormously large. So that's a good one to look up.
There's a lot of speculation that the pharaoh Akhenaten and his daughters, who are portrayed as very long-headed beings, were offshoots of long-headed races. What do you say to that?
Well, I know the depictions of his daughters, like the sculptures especially, are very anatomically fascinating. I would think that whoever the artisan was who made the stone bust would have to have had an example to refer to. Akhenaten, I don't believe, was particularly odd looking, but his daughters definitely are portrayed as having like long skulls sweeping backwards, not vertical like the Paracas. But I just wish, I had access to the a larger collection of artifacts in Egypt to be able to see actual examples of some of the older skulls that they have in their collection. But as far as I know, nothing's been put on display, not even in the new Grand Egyptian Museum that just opened up recently.
And you suspect that this is kind of a worldwide epidemic of reducing our knowledge or hiding this data simply because it brings up questions about the previous epoch?
Oh, definitely.
And what's the big deal, Brian? Why can't we learn about these things?
Well, as I said, the younger academics are much more open-minded to it. I think over the course of time, a lot of so-called out-of-place artifacts will wind up being put on display in museums because they can't hide the evidence forever.
And I mean, speculate why there is an issue. I mean, I would think they would want to know that the previous civilization perhaps had their own physics, had their own science. And this is why we see so many archaeological anomalies in the ancient parts of the world.
Well, I guess it's the old story of a student learns from his professor, becomes a professor, teaches the same information to the students, and it goes on and on and on like that. Or at least that's been the history of this. But as more and more strange artifacts and body parts start showing up, it can't be kept hidden for forever.
Yeah. Have you been able to get a complete skeleton of a Paracas person? And I think at some point I read that not only did you do DNA, but didn't you have a group come down and actually get permission from the government to do some kind of an analysis or a pathological analysis of a Paracas body?
No, we've been trying to. Actually, L.A. Marzulli, who's been a very big part of all of this study, and about 5 years ago, he and I and his cameraman were given access to a private museum, and Ellie and his cameraman immediately focused on this display case of elongated skulls, and then I looked to the left and I said to them, "Here's a mummy," and there on display was a complete adult Paracas mummy. We tried to ask permission to take DNA samples and were told no, we're not allowed to because a group from Harvard is analyzing. They have exclusive access, but I'm hoping in the near future that I'll be able to go back to that little private museum and get access to the mummy to be able to photograph and film properly. I was allowed 3 photographs and that was it. Then we were told we had to leave.
Describe the mummy. Was it like an Egyptian mummy or was it just wrapped up and it had the covering of this elongated head?
Actually, it was mainly or largely uncovered.
Oh,
So I could see all the skin, I could see the head, I could see the neck, I could see the shape of the elongated skull. It was, probably an individual in his or her 20s or 30s. I was so shocked to be able to see that. But as I say, up till now, we've not been able to get access to it to be able to do proper photography, filmmaking, or forensic analysis.
wow. Talk
But
about your, go ahead, I'm sorry.
the door may open for that.
Door may open. Excellent. Talk about your association with this Paracas Museum. I've seen pictures of you holding these monstrosities of head. Some of them are red hair. What's the red hair all about?
Well, the red hair is genetic, definitely. Some people say that they were dyed or tinted or something, but I've seen at least 30 or four examples of Paracas elongated heads, mummified heads with this dark auburn red hair. And it definitely appears to be natural, not some kind of tinting or dyeing or bleaching.
And is there an association with other people that have red hair? Is that a clue for some group of other people?
Yeah, again, I think Eurasia.
Eurasia. Okay.
Yeah, because people mistakenly think that red hair comes from Scotland or Ireland, but it's much more ancient than that. It goes back to the Middle East and to the Eurasia area.
How many skulls are in that little museum that it looks like it's like a solid glass building, but obviously you're showing the encasements for these skulls. But how many skulls are in that collection?
Well, unfortunately, the museum closed just before COVID.
Oh my
And
God, so it's not open anymore.
no, then the director died, possibly due to COVID. He was in his early 80s. And so his children still have the collection of artifacts, but they're stored in boxes in their houses. They're no longer on public display.
Oh my God. Are there any museums in Peru or any place in South America like Bolivia that have mummies or any remains of Paracas individuals?
Well, or related people. There's a tiny museum on Lake Titicaca in Bolivia that I've been to a few times, and looks like about a 1.5 year old child that has an enormously elongated head. I wasn't allowed to photograph it until I bribed the man who unlocked the door. Also, there's a little museum, a tiny museum. This is all in private museums, not in public museums, but there's another museum at a little village called Patapatani, and I've had access to that one twice. And I took doctor or physician with me both times, and there's a 12 to 13-year-old female with an enormous elongated skull, probably 1.5 times normal. And then right next to it is a 8-month-old fetus with a skull the size of its torso.
Oh my
So
God.
both doctors believe that they were mother and baby who died during childbirth.
That's amazing. So are these other beings that are being found in other parts of South America, are they all related to Paracas people, or is there another group that is as odd as the Paracas people that are in that area?
I think there are probably other groups because I don't think the Paracas migrated as far as Bolivia. They ventured into the highlands of Peru as far as Cusco, but they never, as far as I can tell, made it to Lake Titicaca. So we may be looking at different branches of or subspecies of Homo sapiens that existed probably around the same time. There's also a little mummy in a museum in the highlands of Peru called the mummy is called Waiki, and it's a very strange specimen. It looks like a 2-year old, but I've taken many doctors and dentists to look at it, and they say the dentition is that of a 7 or 8-year old. So it's a very anomalous little being.
I have seen pictures at the turn of the century of some of these mound builders in the United States, and there are not only are they tall, but a lot of them have elongated skulls. Have you done any kind of research with any of those reports?
No, I haven't. I focus on the parts of the world, mainly Peru and Bolivia, but also Egypt and some other places. But I don't like to study too many different facets of this because then I think the information starts to get diluted down.
Tell us about the enigma of cranial deformation with David Childress, Hatcher Childress. What was the feeling on that one? I mean, David's writing about all kinds of unusual things constantly. That's just what his career's been. But what was the
Mhm.
motivation to get together and write that book? Because I mean, the cover is a Paracas head.
True. Well, actually, I approached David and told him this is it more than 10 years ago. I told him that I was thinking of writing a book about elongated skulls, and he said immediately, why don't we write it together? And I thought, well, that's great. He's a very famous author. So I was very honored to be able to co-write that book with him.
Yeah. And what was I mean, I mentioned this before. It covers Egypt, South America, Mexico, and Malta. What is going on with Malta? I mean, I don't think I've seen the elongated skulls there. Is there burials that are filled with these kinds of individuals, or is it just a few?
No, they supposedly found between 300 and 3,000 of them
Oh my
in
God.
a very large tomb on the island of Malta. And in the 1950s, I believe they were all taken off this. The ones that were on display were taken off display, and they haven't been seen since. So again, it's another example of a governmental cover-up of something anomalous that they don't want anyone to know about.
Yeah, I always tell people because I travel and do tours in Mexico a lot that you'll never see many of the items in the Mexican museums in the United States. It just would be edited off because there's no explanation for them, which is kind of sad. I mean, you're saying that the powers that be don't want to come up with an explanation for why there's a branch of humans that have these heads. Are you speculating in your research that a lot of these advanced stonemasonry is attributed to Paracas, which could be
No,
pre-Inca, I guess?
well, it's definitely pre-Inca, but I don't think the Paracas. Again, the polygonal megalithic works are a complete mystery to everybody. And the idea that they were made by the Inca is completely imbecilic.
But they don't listen to that, I guess. It's like, our belief is the early Inca were advanced stonemasonry masons, I guess.
Well, they try to say that, but again, in the archaeological record, all we find are bronze tools. Bronze is far too soft to be able to shape, excuse me, as something as hard as basalt or granite. So clearly, advanced technology was involved in the construction of the megalithic works,
Hmm.
both in Egypt and in Peru and in Lebanon and Turkey and different countries.
Let's go to Egypt for a bit. You have a number of books on advanced machinery or machining in Egypt. Who do you suspect were the inventors of the tools that make those boreholes and cut stone and perhaps even built the Great Pyramids?
Well, again, another great mystery, but I'm not close to the idea that it was aliens or extraterrestrials who came, constructed, were damaged or destroyed, or had to flee due to the series of cataclysms during the Younger Dryas. But I can't think of a human civilization that could achieve that kind of work. People keep saying Atlantis, and there's no evidence of it really of Atlantis. So I'm open to the idea that other beings have come here either to work with us or just independently doing what they wanted to do and then left.
So, are we hybrids?
Some people think so.
That's true.
Yeah, there are some very anomalous things about us that make us, possibly not part of standard evolution.
Talk a bit about the technology that you're writing about when we see these megalithic stones. Like you've been to the quarries, the Aswan quarries, and seen the unexcavated obelisk there. What's the tech that's doing that? Who's creating these scoop tools, and what's the technology you suspect behind that?
I think it's kind of an energetic disruptor of some kind. I don't think there were tools that actually came in physical contact with the stone, such as with the unfinished obelisk, but it's almost like a sandblasting technique, but on a much more advanced scale. I think whatever machine it is they had was capable of disrupting possibly the quartz inside of the stone, causing it to cause like micro explosions. And so the stone turns to sand and simply falls down into the trenches.
And they would use that in a way to extract the stone, and then I guess they use other technology to smooth it. But I've seen, and I'm sure you have too, evidence up close and personal of these obelisks, and they're cut with a high level of precision that copper stone tools could never cut.
No, definitely. You're talking at least on the level of diamond technology.
Yeah. What do you think the pyramids were I mean, you've been to the Red Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, the Khufu Pyramid. What do you think the pyramids were used for?
I think they were energetic structures, just like what Christopher Dunn talks about. They were able to somehow collect energy. And then I think the function of the obelisk was that they were receptors of energy. So the energy would go from the pyramids to the obelisk, cause them to vibrate and set up like a mini force field in the vicinity of the obelisk. Because the obelisks were always organized very specifically. They weren't in random locations like at Karnak. They were definitely like lined up in rows going from the front to the back of the oldest part of Karnak.
Yeah, I've heard that from a number of people who live there. So you think there's a probably an acoustic technology that we're not aware of, or it's kind of designed into the structure?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of vibratory technology.
I've always heard that Hathor at Dendera was a healing temple, that it sits on some kind of a ley line, an energetic ley line. What's your feeling on temples in Egypt being placed over telluric fields?
Oh, I think definitely, especially again when we look at the megalithic stuff, which is pre-dynastic, they are in very specific locations. They're not, in like a random kind of organization, very specifically set up, most likely on energetic lines. And the same thing in Peru. There's actually all of the megalithic structures in Peru are actually lined up on what's called the path of Viracocha that goes from the northwest to the southeast. So Machu Picchu, Ollantaytambo, Sacsayhuaman are all lined up on this one specific energetic line that doesn't really function like it used to, but at one time it would have been definitely a line of focused energy.
I've heard people who are at Sacsayhuaman that there are places you can stand and actually feel like some form of vibrating energy. Have you experienced that?
Not at Sacsayhuaman, but at other ancient locations in Peru, definitely. There's one site called Chavin de Huantar where there's a circular ceremonial space in front of the two ancient pyramids. And if you stand right in the middle of that and raise your hands up into the air, your fingers start to vibrate.
So it's passing up through your body and exiting through the fingers is what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Is there any place in Peru or neighboring countries that have buildings that have subtle energy working through them and are used for either healing or cognition or whatever?
I don't think anymore because we do see a lot of cataclysmic damage at all of the sites. So I don't think they function like they did, say, 13,000 plus years ago.
So I mean, you've heard of Jesus Gamarra's father's three world theory. He believes that the earliest period is, a few 100,000 years ago, which is where the big stones at Sacsayhuaman were placed. What's your feeling on that theory of the three worlds?
I used to believe in that, but I don't really anymore. Over the course of time, I really think there are two building styles. There's the pre-Inca megalithic and then the Inca. So I'm not really a follower of that belief system anymore.
Okay, so what would you say is a time period of the first phase?
A minimum 13,000 years. Maximum, I have no idea.
So it could be 100,000 and then it kind of fell apart at around 13,000, which would align with the cataclysm that hit the earth and pretty much wiped out humanity 80% plus. Is that what you're suggesting?
Right. Excuse me.
Is there evidence of cataclysms in Peru?
Oh, definitely.
What areas?
There's a site called Silustani, which is near Lake Titicaca, where we see definite evidence of heat vitrification of stone, like a melting of the surface. And also in and around Cusco, we see that as well, always on the western surfaces.
Facing west.
Yeah.
Interesting. So that would be high heat from what's the suspicion? Asteroid?
The sun.
The sun.
Yeah,
Okay. That would kind of go to Robert Schoch's theory of sunbursts then, I guess.
exactly.
Okay. Is there any place else like that in like Bolivia that has, because I know you've been to Pumapunku a few times.
I've been there about 70 times now.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, no, there's definite evidence of heat vitrification at Pumapunku as well.
Talk a
We
minute
were,
about Pumapunku. Polanski, who was an early architect, suggested that that place was probably, what was it, 25,000 years old or something. And he was immediately reprimanded by the authorities. This isn't like the early 1920s, I think. But what do you say to that? Because it's a very, very sophisticated place, isn't it?
well, it used to be. It's an absolute mess now. So the problem with Pumapunku is that it has been attacked over the course of a long period of time. As soon as the Spanish arrived, they started to take Pumapunku apart to make the foundations for buildings in the nearby little town of Tiwanaku, which isn't great. It also evidence that it was hit by a major tsunami from Lake Titicaca. So, and then in the I think 1920s, they built a railroad from Lake Titicaca to La Paz in Bolivia, and they literally blew up Pumapunku to use as the bed for the gravel or bed for the railway system. So it's been badly abused over a long period of time, but I find it the most mysterious place on the planet.
And I mean, there's big sections of flooring and walls and stuff that are still buried there, aren't there?
Oh yeah, they're they're giant slabs of maybe 40 or 50 tons that are tilting into the ground by about 30 degrees. And recent scanning, I'm not sure what technique they use, probably ground penetrating radar shows that there's at least twice as much Pumapunku underground as there is on the surface now. And it's been, as I was saying, it's been rifled through over the course of hundreds of years. So we have no idea how big it originally was or what it looked like. No matter how people try to build models of it, you can't because there's only probably 10% of Pumapunku left compared to what there was originally.
So this big tsunami may have buried a majority of it under soil, is what you're suggesting.
Yeah. And again, that study's only about 2 years old. So the government authorities in Bolivia do know that Pumapunku is at least twice the size underground as it is above ground, but they don't want to do excavations
Why not?
because the local Aymara people insist that their ancestors built Pumapunku between 1,000 and 2,000 years ago.
Oh, I didn't know they had found burials there. If the local indigenous people are unhappy about excavating, that typically that's because there's a burial ground or something.
No, they're just adamant that their ancestors built Pumapunku and Tiwanaku. And so there have been no excavations there for about at least 5 years, and I don't foresee there being any major excavations in the future. It's one of those, again, it's one of those problems with, local people don't want something done. So the government says, okay, well, we have to respect what they think, and therefore we're not going to be scientific about this and just leave the place as it is.
Oh, God. Talk a little bit about the stonework. I understand that the stones are andesite, which is very hard,
Mhm.
igneous rock. What is the suggested technique that was used to cut and form some of the flooring and other parts of buildings?
Well, Pumapunku is made up of two types of stone. One is red sandstone from a quarry 8 miles to the west, and then the gray andesite is from the top of a volcano 45 miles to the northeast. We've had so many engineers look at, in person at Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, and they're flabbergasted. You can't see any machine marks or sanding marks. As Giorgio Tsoukalos would say, as flat as a bathroom mirror, but that it really is the finish on some of the stone.
Wow.
I've taken a 3 foot level there and put it up against one of the H blocks, and there's no movement whatsoever. It is perfectly flat.
So that suggests machining.
Oh, they're machining beyond our capability, as far as I can tell, beyond 21st century technology.
You know, it's funny about that place, Brian, because some of the sculptures seem rudimentary, like maybe they came later or other civilizations came after the demise of the original founders of Pumapunku. What do you say?
Oh, definitely. When the Tiwanaku people showed up, which was around 100 AD, they existed there until about 1000 AD. And they definitely took some of the original stone and etched in the carving of Birdman and the god Viracocha and things like that. So, but you can tell the difference between the craftsmanship between the flatness of the surface and the rather crude etching of the images into the stone.
Oh my God, you're the first person that's ever said that. So these big archways that are made from megalithic blocks were there without all this calligraphy and hieroglyphics, and this follow-up groups are the ones who carved that material.
Yeah,
Wow. Are there other examples of that? I mean, are there other, 'cause apparently there was a pyramid there at some point, wasn't there?
yeah, there still is. It's called the Akapana. It's a seven-layer pyramid, mainly made out of mud brick, but there is evidence that it is again far older than the Tiwanaku culture because they're giant slabs of massive slabs of andesite stone that are still poking out of some of the walls. So it's another example of a structure that was built originally and then recycled by later culture.
And that seems to happen quite a bit on Earth. We see it all over the place in ancient cultures. The planet was wiped clean 9,500 BC, and then they show up again. Other groups show up again and kind of repopulate those areas. Have you been to Göbekli Tepe, Brian?
Yeah, once.
What do you think of that place?
It's impressive in a way. The actual workmanship is very crude. It's
Yeah,
nothing like what we see in Egypt or in Peru. The stone is local, so you don't have the mystery of the transportation of the stone. The fact that it was supposedly buried on purpose is mysterious, and also supposedly only 1/30th or 1/40th of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated with no plans of further investigation for the foreseeable future, which is kind of weird. But technically, I would say Göbekli Tepe is not impressive, but it is something that is worth seeing at least once.
yeah, I agree with you. As we conclude, what are you working on now when it comes to these ancient cultures? Have you found other civilizations that you're interested in, other Homo sapien types of individuals?
Not recently. We've had a real problem because of COVID. That's shut down for more than 2 years, being able to access anything. So now that things are opening up again, I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing new, ancient things I've never seen before. Mildly doubtful that I will because I've spent more than 15 years living in Peru and exploring, and I have a number of friends who are local experts. If they were to find anything, they'd definitely tell me about it. But I'm quite content with how my life is at this point, and still doing tours in Peru and Bolivia and Egypt with maybe other ones coming up like Easter. I've been to Easter Island a few times. I'd like to go again. I'd like to go back to Baalbek in Lebanon, but not right now because they're bombing right next to it.
I know it's kind of,
And Petra and Jordan, I'd love to see again. Yeah, aside from that, I'm not quite sure. India, definitely at some point.
yeah. India is a big one, but the problems with getting reliable transportation is a huge problem there. I've thought about tours there. One last thing, a guy named John Burke was at Pumapunku and did some electromagnetic testing and found that the buildings seemed to be charged and that there was noticeable and trackable energy coming up through a number of the buildings connecting. It seems like they're all kind of connected in a way. Do you know anything about that? And if you do, what is your impression of that?
Well, the andesite stone is very magnetic. So if you take a compass in front of one of the H blocks, for example, you'll notice that the natural magnetic field is running straight in front from right to left. But then if you take the compass and put it in the slot of the H block and move it slowly towards the back where there's a little false door, the compass will move by 270 degrees.
Whoa.
And then when you pull it back out, it corrects itself and goes back to normal again. So the andesite is very magnetic. The red sandstone is not magnetic at all. And I think the andesite was chosen for its magnetic properties for the original function.
But have you heard any studies of that area of it sitting on a ley line or a telluric anomaly, a geomagnetic anomaly?
Not that I know of, but I wouldn't doubt that that is the case.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of these ancient people were familiar with anomalies and they built their temples over anomalies. And there's a growing, and I've had them on the program, a growing body of scientists that are beginning to study this, which
Yeah,
is,
that's great.
yeah, which is important. Hey, it's been great speaking with you. Give people your website, let them know how they can get a hold of you.
Okay, my website is www.hiddenincatours.com.
Okay. And you have, I looked at your site, you have a number of tours coming up. Where are you going to be going in 2025?
In April is, well, as we were discussing earlier, February, I'm going to the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Then
Conscious
in
life.
April,
Right.
yeah, then in April, we're having a conference in Egypt, and after that, a tour. Then in June, we have a major tour of Peru and Bolivia. And then in November, another major tour of Peru and Bolivia.
So your itinerary for these foreign journeys is typically looking at ancient buildings and getting a sense of perhaps the anomalies of them. What's your goal when you do an itinerary at these places?
Well, mainly to show the clear difference between the megalithic and the Inca work, or between the pre-dynastic and the dynastic work in Egypt, which everyone sees quite obviously after about the second day. It's like night, it is like night and day in terms of construction technique.
Mhm.
Also, we delve into spirituality on some level, anomalous skulls where it's possible to observe them. We like to do like a quite a well-rounded tour, mixing spirituality, Andean Incan culture, Egyptian mysteries, etc. So it's not 100% about lost ancient technology, but more and more we're trying to do a much more well-rounded exploration of every aspect of any of these areas.
Sounds good. Hey, do you have any new books coming up? Are you working on something new?
Not as far as I can tell, I've written 37 books. I might do one about ancient Israel if I can ever get there, which is my plan. And then I would also do a book, obviously, about ancient India because there's so much megalithic stuff in India. It's insane.
Yeah,
But that's about it for now.
fantastic. Brien Foerster, fantastic. Appreciate your time and look forward to talking to you again.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. Always a pleasure.